First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for receiving me in the context of this symposium. So, let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Simon Zara. I'm an artist researcher, a PhD student in Lille University, and also an assistant teacher and researcher at Strasbourg University. My communication is called the latent image, mutation, potentiality, viscosity. Among the important literature dealing with the circulation of pictures, the endless flow of pictures seems to be a recurring metaphor. We are facing myriads of images, according to the historian Horst Bredekamp, and we are dealing with an avalanche of practically unlimited images for Joan Fontcoberta. Although some of these views are nuanced, they return to the recurring observation of a society reduced to what's visible, like Jean-Louis Comolli proposed, or to quote Walter Benjamin, a space 100 held by the image. Of course, some theorists do not share this metaphor of fluidity and point out its limits. By concentrating on the materiality of this circulation, for example. Faced with the methodological impasse of this alarmist discourse, there appears to be a need to develop an effective method of analysis. My discipline being that of the visual arts, I then focused on certain works, artistic proposals, and exhibitions exploring this condition of visual culture. As for the American historian W.J.T. Mitchell, it is a question of avoiding the trap of the theoretical iconoclasm, the double denunciation of the consistency and the inconsistency of pictures, or the sterile criticism of a world merged with pictures. Investigating image fluctuation can only reconduct a generalist view if it isn't anchored in any material, historical, technical and social context. This is why I will focus on a moment of the image in order to reconfigure the understanding of this phenomenon from a situated point of view. The visual objects circulating through these iconic networks seem to be in perpetual mutation. They reveal themselves in stages, change status, property, substance, sometimes emancipate themselves from their original author, but above all, no longer respond to the need to exist in a finite form. This is why I propose the concept of latent image to name them. Borrowed from the vocabulary of analog photography, the latent image is an invisible picture carried by a sensitive surface exposed to light, which requires a treatment to become apparent. Rather than a typology of pictures, I will concentrate on a certain mode of existence of images. The latent image could thus be defined as an indeterminate state, that moment during which all potentialities are still open. An image that would be defined not when it is observed by a viewer, but by possibilities that exist simultaneously. The method that I would like to explore is not designed to analyze a large corpus of pictures. It could even seem disconcerting, because I start from the fact that the object studied is beyond me and that my study is part of its evolution. This is not an admission of failure or a compromise, it's a question of not receding before such a complex, multidimensional phenomenon as image circulation, of seeking a balance between a reading that would give too much power to images and another that would treat them only as data or objects limited to their surface. Considering the circulation of images from the concept of latent image allows us to question the way in which images mediate social relations, without denying them the role of agents, and whilst considering their aesthetic and material qualities. In order to test the proposed method, I will suggest the case study of a collective art project. In 1999, French artists Philippe Parreno and Pierre Huyghe bought a character named Anli from a Japanese character design company, which offers a catalog of ready-to-use characters for the audiovisual industry, like manga, video games, films, animations, advertisements, among others. Throughout this study, I will use the pronoun it to talk about this character. So Anli exists in the form of a picture, that of a young girl using the graphic codes of manga. It has large, expressive eyes, synthetic features, a large forehead, a small nose, etc. Huyghe and Parreno distributed it to a group of artists, allowing them to produce original works. Each one was free to manipulate and alter Anli, so it appears in multiple forms as it is reused. Its graphic style, clothes, voice, hair color, attitude, and even the spelling of its name change. Its identity is variable and polyphonic. More than 25 artworks are thus produced by several artists and authors, like Liam Gillick or Dominique Gonzalez Forrester, via different media. Thus begins the project No Ghost, Just a Shell, which is described as a contemporary tale in which a sign attracts a host of directors before gaining its freedom. Since the artists end up staging its death, or rather its liberation, by producing a legal document transferring the copyright of the character to a foundation belonging only to itself. It is first of all the story around the character that seems enlightening to me. In Japan, there would be companies that market fictional characters. The more informed the narrative potential of a character, the higher it's priced. The two artists then diverted the expected use of such a sign to make it the subject of a processual and collective project. Anli is latent image, not only for the entertainment industry, but also for the art world. One of the specificities of Anli is its fluctuating states. Anli changes appearance, voice actor, authors, medium, etc. From Anywhere Out of the World, which is one of the very first works dedicated to it, Anli tells us that it has been redesigned by showing us its first design, like we can see in this picture. From 1999 to 2002, the picture is distributed among dozens of artists and designers in the form of a digital file. We could be tempted to qualify this project as a precursor of certain current practices of picture circulation. Moreover, during an interview, Huyghe declares, and I quote him, "I work with contamination, propagation of things, what is permeable, porous." End of quote. This vocabulary is not without recalling the one used to theorize the phenomenon of the meme. As early as 1976, Richard Dawkins described it as the cultural counterpart of the gene, According to him, the meme would be a media virus capable of self-replication, a vehicle for infecting another mind and reproducing itself. But, as the researcher Henry Jenkins suggests, memetics misses its target to explain the phenomena of cultural circulation and assimilation. We would have to consider two elements. First, the agency of human actors, and second, the specificities of the medium within which the ideas circulate. Let us then set aside organic analogies and analyze the project from the individual and collective choices of the artists involved. In her book Girlhood and the Plastic Image, theorist Heather Warren Crow offers a political critique of the project by deconstructing the savior qualities lent to Huyghe and Parisot. She gives an alternative point of view. Two white men kidnap a Japanese teenager to keep her safe within the European Union and the framework of contemporary art. They share her with a group of mainly European artists before silencing her. A deliberately provocative approach emphasizes the Eurocentric and neo-colonialist dynamics of the artistic process. This reading is moreover reinforced by several critics. Shifting our analysis from the model of the media virus to that of the agency of actors allows us to reveal underlying political stakes that quantitative and aesthetic analysis would not have allowed. We could retort that this project remains within a fictional framework. But it is indeed the relation of Huyghe and Parisot to the image that seems problematic. As Maxime Boisdy and Stéphane Roth remind us, and I quote them, images and the ordinary relations we have with them are the product of historical power relations that remain operative. Thus, the displacements and transformations of An Lee allow us to understand what several theorists have formulated, namely that the image is traditionally treated as an otherness to be colonized, by default female. The choice to seize a picture of an Asian girl does not seem trivial, nor does its mode of circulation. I would like to dwell on the transformations of the image. This one seems indeed to mutate. The term of mutation could seem out of place after the questioning of the organic analogies. Indeed, the image does not have self-replicating property. It cannot mutate by itself. I join here Jean-Michel Durafour, for whom, and I quote him, "There is no mutation of images. There are only images by various regimes of mutations." End of quote. It would be necessary for us to describe the regimes of mutation, that is to say, the forces in play, the authors, the owners, or the environment of the image, among others. Looking at the body of work in the official project, one aesthetic seems predominant, that of the alien. An Lee no longer has pupils. Its face has elongated, its skin has taken on a greyish hue, and its melancholy expression has faded into sketchy, three-dimensional modeling. It is closer to the visual trope of the alien than that of a sad little girl. These aesthetic choices might even signal a form of double alienation. An Lee is the other, but it also becomes alien to itself. This alienation rather allows us to perceive the voices of the different artists. However, An Lee is not simply the image of a little girl. It is a character who conforms to the conventions of manga. In a short text, anthropologist Rachel Thorne returns to Western misinterpretation. As European readers, we tend to perceive manga characters as Caucasian figures. This bias would come from our Eurocentric system of representation and meaning. Yet, An Lee is Japanese by default, not just because it comes from a Japanese company made in Japan, but because it comes from a long pictorial tradition involving specific cultural codes of representation. An Lee represents an Asian girl. The transformation of the image of an Asian girl into an image of an alien creature could then be interpreted as an exotic perception of the Far East. In the context of the project, An Lee becomes an alien, in the primary sense of the word, an outsider. Of course, some of the artworks maintain the character's original aesthetic and signify that the mutation regimes make An Lee an unstable image existing in a form of a trans identity. However, the way in which the An Lee sign is treated reflects on a lack of knowledge of the manga industry. In his notes, Pareno offers a pertinent commentary. According to the artist, manga narratives are based on characters in order to save time in mass production. He thus highlights a phenomenon called media mix, which the researcher Mark Steinberg designates as a multiplication through various media of a same character. For the author, this is specific to the characteristics of the manga medium and more particularly to anime, which is Japanese animated film, and it would have originated in Japan. The author, Buntavi Suvilai, explained that the character becomes the point of convergence between various media. Such a transmedia circulation constitutes a virtuous circle benefiting different economic sectors. This strategy of transmedia production is reminiscent of the program of No Ghost, Just a Shell. If Huyghe and Pareno claim to have liberated An Lee from the manga and anime economic model, it is only to inscribe it into another similar logic. Transmedia circulation, collaboration of several authors, polarization around a character, among others. Indeed, the sign An Lee is reworked through different artistic medium like video, sculptures, screen printing, painting, installation, etc., borrowing the codes of multiple media formats like advertising, billboards, cinema, press, events, etc. Nevertheless, An Lee appears under various aesthetics. The project does not defend a uniform vision of the character, as is usually the case in anime's media mix. The singular path undertaken by the authors of the project borrow more than we might think from the media mix. The critical experiment coordinated by Huyghe and Pareno then seems to miss its target. They reduce the sign and its cultural context of origin to pretexts for a collective artistic exercise, and they summon an apparent elsewhere to be exceeded. Moreover, after an analysis of the transmedia environment specific to manga and anime, it appears that the artistic approach proposed by the artists could well fill the original function of the character, thus taking a transmedia trajectory that many manga characters already have. An Lee's latency was, even before Huyghe and Pareno, its main feature. And despite the so-called liberation of the sign, its potential seemed channeled. Despite their total freedom, the authors remain dependent on an identifiable figure. For example, very few dare to be abstract. This project does not allow us to establish a unique method of analysis, but it reminds us that the circulation of images depends time and again on particular choices requiring a case-by-case approach. Much of No Ghost, Just a Shell is an exercise in ventriloquism. The authors animate Annely through multiple narratives and voices. Yet Huyghe and Parreno are not fooled. Annely is only a platform for narrative, like Huyghe said. This narration confers a certain ambiguity to the project because it stages a vitalist impulse. Annely expresses itself on several occasions as a being endowed with consciousness, capable of recognizing its status as a sign, commenting on it, as if a form of independence were possible. This staging allows in some ways to picture a central concept in the study of images, which is agency. We could summarize this concept as the attribution of an intentionality and a subjectivity to the images. It is a question of reconfiguring the role of the image as an agent. An analysis taking into account the agency of the image requires us to revise the division between subject and object. And I would even extend this motion, putting forward the idea of viscosity, already explored by the philosopher Timothy Morton. The image would be a viscous agent. It would stick to our subjectivity to the point of being part of it. To circle it would be impossible, and to observe it would already alter it. Any mission of ontological distancing would then be doomed to reproduce theoretical blind spots. Thus, the meta-narratives developed through the No Ghost, Just a Shell project are problematic because they reinforce the division between subject and object. For Timothy Morton, and I quote him, "No discourse is truly objective if that means that it is a master language that sits meta to what it is talking about." But how can we refocus our analysis on the sign without falling into the similar theoretical impasse? I cannot observe from the outside the phenomenon of the circulation of pictures. I must situate myself from my point of view, within the flow. This requires understanding that a mutual contamination is at work between subject and object. I participate in the circulation and the mutation of images through my observation, my analysis. And these are capable of acting as intermediaries, firstly because there are so many mediators in our social relationships, but also because our relationship to the world is made through images. In order to assert my position in this study, I decided to investigate the individuals who lent their voice, their body, their energy, or their time to Annely. These actors are somehow caught between the artists and the image. Nevertheless, their agency is not to be confused with Annely's, and it is difficult to dissociate from the discourse and desires projected by the authors, the viewer, or even by myself as a researcher. This is why I decided to conduct a series of interviews in a field setting, in an attempt to listen to Annely bypassing the official or validated comments for the project. What does this sign tell us through its silent zones, the backstage of its creation, its off-screen? If the No Ghost, Just a Shell project reconducts relationships of social domination over a sign, as Warren Crow suggests, it seemed important to me not to apprehend the human actors involved in the project as passive or subordinate elements. In many films, these individuals, like models, performers, voice actors. They lend their voice to An Lee. But isn't this still ventriloquism? Giving them a voice seemed necessary to me, and perhaps this act would bring me a little closer to An Lee, knowing that I would never be able to exhaust it ontologically. I still wished to draw the contours by looking for its faults. If it is difficult to disentangle what An Lee is from what others express about it or through it, at least I can define what it is not. To my knowledge, there is no such interview. The attention is systematically directed towards the authors of the project or a set of specialists, as if they were the only ones to guarantee an expertise on the issues raised by the project. I am currently in the process of conducting these interviews, and therefore I cannot yet process the results. Finally, the analysis of No Ghost, Just a Shell is most enlightening. It allows us to experiment a methodology on a restricted sample. And although I believe in adapting to each case, we were able to see the limits of organic analogies to apprehend the phenomenon of circulation and the mutation regimes of images. This required us to shift our attention to the agency, both of the actors of the project but also of the image itself, since the latter needs to be requalified as an actor, but also to study the media environment within which the image materializes and circulates, by inscribing it in a broader history of media, without forgetting the iconographic qualities and the political reading of the image, by avoiding to reduce it to limited data. This method requires the use of tools from art history, philosophy, communication science, visual studies, sociology, and more. But according to me, the main teaching of his analysis would be this reminder of the withdrawal of the image. The concept of latent image asks us to include in any observation and reflection an irreducible and imponderable data. This latency does not belong to anyone. It lies at the bottom layers of the image. It is possible to approach it, but never to exhaust it. It escapes us. This is why An Lee cannot be liberated, nor killed, and why it is not possible to loop around it, nor even to speak in its name. Thank you very much for your attention.